And we're live. Hello, book lovers. Welcome to the 127th episode of Authors Love Bookstores, presented by A Mighty Blaze. Yes, Andy, it's 127.
Wow. That's a lucky number, I think.
I think it's a great number.
For sure.
I think it's going to be a great show. My name is Kimberly Hensle Lowrance. I am your host today. If you're new to A Mighty Blaze, welcome. We're happy that you're here. We are a group of volunteer creatives who have been hosting online literary events for the past 3 years to help support books, authors, and the wider publishing community. Here in Authors Love Bookstores, my co-host, Joe Moldover, and I bring you conversations between authors and their favorite independent booksellers to shine a light on storytelling, creativity, and the small businesses that enrich our communities. Today, we are in Virginia, and where I'm very pleased to welcome our author and our bookseller, Audrey Burges. Audrey, I realized I didn't even double check I was saying your last name correctly.
You said it exactly right. Good job.
We had so much fun chatting before we went live. I forgot to ask that really important question. And bookseller Andy Richardson. Welcome to you both. Okay.
Thank you.
Let me tell our audience a little bit about Audrey and Andy. So Audrey is a writer of novels, humor, satire, and essays. Her debut novel, The Minuscule Mansion of MYRA Malone.
I should have it, but I don't.
It's right here. Oh, we have it. You're covered then. It's out now. Her second novel is coming out next year. If one book wasn't impressive.
UK cover.
There you go. I like that cover.
I have that too, but I didn't want to make people feel bad and hold it up.
That's okay.
Is that the UK version?
Yes, it has miniatures from the book.
It's so gorgeous.
Oh,
they're both so gorgeous. I can't.
They're both just absolutely. I have totally lucked out with covers. Totally.
They're really great. Oh wow, I love that comparison of covers from different countries. Because
me too.
You wonder, why can't we all have the same cover? But the fact that you get to have more than one. That's really exciting.
Yeah.
Okay. Let me.
Sorry, I deflected. Sorry.
We'll get to it. Okay. So her first book is out now, and then again, if that's not impressive enough, she has a second one already in the queue to come out next year, and that one's called A House Like an Accordion. Both of them have been published by Berkeley, which is part of Penguin Random House. Audrey's writing can be found in a whole bunch of publications and anthologies, including McSweeney's, Pithead Chapel, Cease, Cows, Lost Balloon, Into the Void, and Wigleaf. She was raised in Arizona, but now happily lives in Virginia with her family. Andrea, or Andy Richardson, is the general manager of Fountain Bookstore in Richmond, Virginia. The store was opened in 1978 as a seller of technical manuals and professional books. But now it's an independent, general, full-service bookstore serving Metro Richmond and actually serving the world, because now, thanks to the internet, bookstores can have an impact everywhere. And the store offers more author programming than any other bookstore in the state of Virginia. Or is it the Commonwealth of Virginia? What do I say?
We are the Commonwealth of Virginia, but I think we're also okay to be the state.
Yeah.
I'm in Massachusetts, and we are a Commonwealth also. That's why I was okay, so we're going to talk about author programming later on. So welcome, Andy and Audrey. We're really happy to have you. To our audience, if you have questions for our guests, please post them below in the comments, and we will get to as many as we can later on during the show. Okay, Audrey, tell us about Fountain, because when we invited you to be on the show, so I should say that Audrey and I follow each other on Twitter. And so that, I don't exactly know how that happened, but lucky me. And that's the thing about Twitter, right? You don't remember
accident.
You made connections.
Right.
We follow one another on Twitter. And so when I heard that you had a book out, I was like, we have to have you on the show. And you immediately said that you wanted to talk with Fountain. So tell us about this bookstore, your connection. Why is the store so special?
Well, it's special for a lot of reasons. Actually, the book, The Minuscule Mansion of MYRA Malone, is partly set. Thank you. Partly set in a series of linked furniture stores that are based on Shockoe Bottom, which is also where Fountain is located. And so that kind of the cobblestones and the old buildings and the kind of gaslight feel to it is very much a part of the book. But even beyond that, Fountain was always my favorite place to walk in. I used to work in downtown Richmond, and whenever I needed to go just kind of get, sometimes you have a day that you just kind of really need bookstore vibes. That was where I would always go. Because to me, it's really the, it's the quintessential independent bookstore. It's the creaky door when you walk in and someone immediately saying hi and asking if they can help and what you're reading and what they want to, what you want to look for. And just, it smells like books and it's just got great ambiance and great friendly people. And so I've just always, it's always been the independent bookstore that A, I use, B, I send friends to when they're in the area. And it's always been a great place to be. So they also, because I was a customer there, when my book got announced, they actually reached out to me, which was very sweet, and said, "Hey, we saw you had a book coming out." And so they hosted my launch party, which was so sweet. And just really, they've just been really supportive of the book and of me. And that to me is just totally consistent with their whole vibe. They're just a great place.
Congratulations, Andy. That's so wonderful. I love this part of the interview when the author talks about how much they love the bookstore. It's always the best part. Fountain, if I am correct, please tell me if I'm wrong. You've been around for more than 40 years. Mm-hmm. You've had at least 3 sets of owners during that time.
We have. So we just had our 45th birthday. The beginning of February was our 45th birthday. I want to say February 7th. I'd have to double check, but we just turned 45. We've had 3 owners. And what is especially cool is that they have all been women. So we have always been women owned, and it's International Women's Day. So that seems like, yeah.
Seems like we're really on theme today. Excellent.
Yes, very much.
And you've also moved locations during your 45, which many bookstores go through that. I'm wondering, on the show, we've talked to a lot of bookstores. This is episode 127. Mm-hmm. So we've talked to a lot of bookstores, and we've definitely had our share of bookstores that are less than a year old or mm-hmm. just, under 5 years. And then we have had bookstores like yours that have been around for decades. And I wonder, what is it about this store, this community that has helped Fountain thrive for so long? What is it about Richmond that's so special?
It really is the community. It's the folks in town. We are in a really beautiful neighborhood. Audrey mentioned we're in Shockoe Slip. So there's Shockoe Slip and Shockoe Bottom.
Sorry, I misspoke.
You're totally, there's lots of difference. So we're in the Slip where you go down the hill, but it's beautiful old buildings, cobblestones. Our building was built in the late 1860s. So we've got the original floor and ceilings and these gorgeous wooden columns that have like big horse-sized nails in them from when other things used to be up. It just, the history of the store is just so comforting and warm. And we've got the best customers. We are just so fortunate to be where we are. We've got the best community. And I think we live in a town that really loves to support local folks and independent folks. And we're so grateful. And then we have, readers like Audrey who turn into, they start as customers and then they turn into author partners. And it has a really familial feel to it, which is nice.
Wonderful. You also have several universities in Richmond.
Yes.
So do you think that adds to the dynamic of your audience, that there's something kind of about that mix of so much learning kind of in the ether?
I think so. It's a pretty progressive town, and those tend to do well with independent bookstores. We have several indie stores in the area, and they're all just great places. They're all thriving. And we're all friendly, which helps too. Yeah. The universities definitely help, and we are such a tourist destination. I'm not sure exactly where we stand in the numbers, but we're in some of the top U.S. wedding destinations because it's just a beautiful town. We've got gorgeous parks, beautiful places for photos. I think that helps. And just getting a lot of people that will travel from out of town. We're in between 3 or 4 really nice sized tourist hotels, and that's helped a lot.
Nice. Good. And so they're all coming to the bookstore and they're all buying the minuscule mansion of MYRA MALONE.
Once I get through with them, they are. I actually sold a copy today talking about how excited I was to do this event. We had a regular customer come in, and he always likes to ask what we're reading and what's going on. So I was talking about how I got to do this, and he said, well, tell me about that book. I said, I would love to. So I went down. He's like, well, I got to get it. I said, you really do. So
thank you.
That's wonderful. Oh, congratulations, Audrey, on your book.
Thank you.
What an achievement. And every time we have an author on talking about a book, I'm just so excited for them because I know how much work goes into this. And there's been a great response to the book. You were telling us before we came live that you've had readers reach out and talk about how immersed they've gotten in the story, how lost they've gotten, and the reviews that have come out have been terrific. So Kirkus says of your book that it's perfect for readers who long to escape into a world of magic and romance. Shelf Awareness says that you charmingly combine threads of magic, whimsy, romance, grief, and loss into a debut novel of great feeling. And it goes on to say that this is a captivating novel of miniature furniture and big themes that are braided together with strong friendships, romance, family ties, and the importance of stepping out of one's comfort zone. Nice.
Very generous review. That was very sweet.
Can you tell our audience a little bit about the book for those people who have not yet read it?
Sure. So the Minuscule Mansion of MYRA Malone is named for a blog that is nominally maintained by a woman named MYRA Malone, but is really the brainchild of her best friend, Gwen, because MYRA has spent most of her life pretty much voluntarily housebound. She would really bristle at the word recluse, but that's what most of the world would characterize her as. And she's been largely homebound since she was a small child after an accident. And most of her life, she's devoted to curating this what she calls the Minuscule Mansion, and what other people would call a dollhouse. And she's been, which she would also disagree with. And writing stories about it and rechanging the rooms. And so her best friend, who's kind of a marketing genius, cajoled her into putting it online. And not long after that happened, it just kind of hit the right niche for people looking for a distraction. And it got really popular online, which was convenient because not long after that, MYRA discovers that the house that she actually lives in is in hock to six figures due to a little bit of shopping her mother has been doing. So consequently, her best friend has to kind of come up with an idea. And the idea she has is to put the mansion online and have people enter a contest to be able to decorate one of the rooms. Not long after that, they hear from a guy who lives across the country and says, I don't know what kind of game you're playing here, but this house that you've posted online is my house. This is my furniture. This is my bedroom that you have a picture of right now. How could that be possible? And so the book kind of unwinds how that could possibly be true.
So good.
We have a little bit of reverberation to our audience.
No.
I think it's me. We're not sure.
Okay.
I'm not sure what's going on today. So if you hear weird noises, it's not any of us. It's just the spirits in the background.
Right.
Okay. So one of the things I always think about when I read a book is that what is the author, like where did the spark of the story come from? Like what inspired the author to write this story? And as reviews said, there's some romance in here, there's some magic, there's some like great love of interior design. But there is this element, you do weave together a lot of different elements in the story. And I kept wondering, did it start with the magic? Did it start with the romance? Did it start with the house? Can you tell us a little bit about the inspiration and the spark that drove this story?
Sure. Yeah, I think the best answer to that question is I wrote the story I wanted to read, actually that I desperately needed to read at that time. It was about 6 months into the pandemic. So we were housebound and stuck at home and living entirely online and, picking up and dropping hobby after hobby after hobby and watching all the other hobbies people were picking up and dropping off. And one of those turned out to be, for whatever reason, algorithms being what they are, several people that I knew and that I followed got really into making miniature kits. And there was a particular kind of miniature kit called a book nook. And most of them are libraries. Some of them are something different, but they're designed to slide between two books on a bookshelf. And a lot of them have electricity and they have little moving parts and little teeny tiny books. And I've always been absolutely entranced by miniatures. I love them. I've always wanted to just look at all their little details. There's something kind of inherently magical about them to me. And so I started thinking, originally I set out to write a lighthearted romantic comedy in this because I was querying at the time a much darker novel, which was kind of a dark and twisty mystery and not really consistent with the voice I'd started to cultivate as a humorist and the audience I'd started to build as a humorist, and B, not really what people were looking for in that moment, that kind of dark moment. And so not really what I was looking for. And so I originally set out to write a lighthearted romantic comedy. And I started with that idea. I thought it was going to be, someone who maybe built these miniature kits and made these things, and somehow they're online and they go viral and she finds love. That's kind of what I set out to write when I started writing. And then about 1,200 words in, there's a scene in the book that was originally in the second chapter, and I think is now the third, where MYRA as a child has kind of gotten the mansion, the minuscule mansion, upstairs in her attic, and she's rearranging the furniture, and she sees a reflection of her own eye, and it winks back at her. And that scene, that moment, flashed into my head, just fully formed. And as soon as it did, I thought, oh, this is a very different book. This isn't a lighthearted romantic comedy. I know exactly who that is. And it just took off from there. And it really unfolded very, very quickly after I realized the kind of story it was.
I love this idea that you wrote the book that you wanted to read. And I loved it in a time of, well, it was hard. There's no way to describe the lockdown except like hard. And
right.
Well, there are other words, but we're just I love that in a time of difficulty, you found a story that we're getting to celebrate today. Oh, that's really, something good came out of a hard time. That's really wonderful.
Well, it was the other thing about it was really the only thing I felt like I could control, right? I couldn't control the fact that my kids were home. I couldn't control the fact that we were from home or falling all over each other, or that we didn't know if it was safe to bring boxes into the house. I couldn't control any of that. But I could control this story to the extent they let me control this story. The characters really did have a lot to say, but that mattered to me more than sleep. I'd get everybody to bed, and then I'd just stay up writing and writing and writing and writing, because it was this one kind of, microcosm that I felt like I had some agency. And I think what's funny as I've been giving interviews about the book is like kind of realizing all these moments in my life that were happening at the time that wound up inflecting the story in ways I didn't even recognize. Someone asked me recently about, there's a little bit about retail addiction in there and where that came from. And I was like, oh, because that was me. Like I was literally online all the time trying to purchase anything I could to just make things a little more normal. Yeah. And I think if I hadn't had somebody to pull me back from that, I might have been Diane, and so I think that, I had a kid who was kind of going through the rough threes at the time. So some of that, some of the small child aspects and emotional aspects of the story were very much something I was going through at the time, but I didn't even realize consciously at the time that I was writing that story how much of that was kind of making its way into what I was writing.
Isn't that wild? But looking back at this point, I think I've got some funky sound. Looking back, you're picking up on new things of the story that you've probably read and edited and rewritten dozens of times. I love that. I love that it's still uncovering itself to you.
Yeah, a book kind of becomes different. For me, once it's kind of in copy edits, it's not really your book anymore. It kind of uncouples itself from the thing that you created. And now it's words that you're expected to make sure you have made accurate and consistent, and that the style guide makes sense and everything like that. And so it becomes the editorial process becomes a much more analytical process. And it almost divorces you from who you were when you were writing the book, in a way that I wouldn't have expected, not having been through it before.
Mm-hmm. Do you remember the first scene that you wrote? Was it that winking scene?
No, the first scene that I wrote was that what is now the second chapter, which was when you meet Gwen and MYRA.
Okay.
The blog that opens the book originally didn't exist, and it didn't exist in the first draft. When I wrote the first draft, there were actually only 4 blog entries. And the one consistent piece of feedback that I was getting from beta readers, and that I ultimately got from my agent and my editor, was that was really how people were getting to know MYRA. And that's what I needed to focus on including more of. So that first blog entry was fairly late in the developmental process for the book. And originally the the teapot that wants to be part of the room was originally the first line in the book.
And we talked a little bit about the covers at the start, so that the American cover, and you have the UK cover as well. And one of the things I love is when you read a book and then when you're done, the cover makes sense to you in a different way.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh, I get this now. Like, oh,
yeah.
I see why they did this, or I see why they did that. And I wonder, did you get a voice in the cover design? Was that something you were involved in? Because it's really great.
Yeah. So my editor, the morning they were going to have the cover conference, which is this meeting where the designers and marketing and everybody gets together and starts talking about concepts for the cover. Cindy contacted me that morning and was like, can you talk to me about themes or tropes in the book, things that you really like on covers, things that you really don't like on covers. And I think she was expecting me to send like 4 or 5 sentences back. And instead I sent her this whole treatise. I'm like, here's the plants I used on purpose. And here's why the floorboards look this way. And here's all this kind of stuff. And so, I think she wrote something very diplomatic back, like, okay, you've given us a lot to work with. And then that was the first cover they sent. And that was the very first cover that I saw. And they sent it to me like very tentatively, like, if you have any input on this, or if there's something you don't. And it just as soon as I opened it, I'm like, this is the book. This is exactly what I had in my head. So yeah, they did a wonderful job.
Excellent.
It is just so gorgeous. And I thought, oh gosh, it's so perfect. And then I saw the UK cover. I'm like, that's perfect too.
Yes. Everybody has, well, it's kind of that same thing that Andy and I talked at my book lunch, and I said this kind of thing. One of the things that I really like when I'm reading magical realism or anything that has a kind of a magical element is when writers put just enough on the page to like, let me fill in my own picture of the way that world works.
Yep.
And I think that's what they did with the cover too. I think everybody has their own kind of picture. The UK cover actually has a mansion at the top, and this was a doll mansion. And this was what my editor in the UK saw in her head when she was picturing the house. But there have been so many different people who have said, oh, I think it looks this way. And I think, it's got this element. And none of that's on the page. That's the world they've built in their head, which I love. I love that there's just thousands of different versions of this house and its contents for all of these readers.
I always think that's I always think that's one of the reasons why when a book is adapted, it's challenging.
Right? It locks it in, right? It locks in somebody's vision. Yeah.
It's someone else's vision than the one that you have. Or when an actor is cast in a role,
exactly
how that character looks. And it's a wonderful actor doing a great job, but you're committed to this other version.
And it changes how you read the words. I feel like it really, you can never quite read the story. Once it's been adapted, you can never quite read the story the same way again, because now you've got somebody else's pictures in there.
Exactly.
And somebody else's voices in your head too, because the actor puts their own spin on it.
Right.
Exactly. So Andy, I said at the beginning that one of the things your store does is more author events and more author programming than any other bookstore in Virginia. I'm not sure how is it that do you count how many events? I'm offering this fact up and I have not validated it.
So when I tell people that, I say that I do not have the numbers to back that up. I am confident that Kelly, who is the current captain of Team Fountain right now, I am confident that she could pull those out. I know that last year we did just a rough estimate, and I think we worked with roughly 300 authors last year. We do tons. And even once everything shut down and we couldn't do in-store events anymore, we said, all right, let's do virtual events. Well, and this, I was telling you before we logged in, this is my virtual event setup. So if anyone has seen me do an event before, this will all look very familiar. It lives in our basement permanently. When I'm not in this chair, the cat is, which is probably why he's very interested in me today. I'm in his spot.
So that means you personally have been involved with many, many, many events. And I am curious, what is your favorite event? Like if you're at a dinner party and someone's like, oh, tell me about the life of a bookseller. What is the author event that you're like, let me tell you?
There are so many.
Okay.
It's like picking a favorite child. This is tough. I like the ones that I always leave feeling the happiest. Obviously, we want to sell books. So the best ones are when we sell out of all of the author's books except for one, because then we know we ordered the exact right amount. But I like to see the connections. I love when the people just really strike that vibe and really enjoy the conversation. And then the readers get into it and people leave feeling like, this sounds so cheesy, but they made a whole new room full of friends, and just the connections. Those are the ones I love. I have done some really exciting, notable ones. Obviously, Audrey was my favorite.
Okay. I was going to say, you don't have to say me.
No, you and I had a great time. We got to do it off-site. We had a great conversation. I really loved doing your launch event. I can't wait to do it for the next one. We've gotten some big names for virtual events. I've gotten to talk to Norman Reedus before. He wrote a book and it's really good. So
that's great.
Yeah, called The Ravaged. So that was a little bit of like a
fangirl moment. Yep.
Yeah.
We got to work with Anthony Porowski from Queer Eye a couple weeks ago here in Richmond at a big event, and he is just as nice as you think he would be.
Awesome.
But just, the big names are fun, but just that seeing people connect and really feel like that, just seeing the authors are just regular people that have great stories to tell and feeling like they've got a new space and a new community. Those are my favorites.
I imagine there's a lot of pleasure also in having a launch like Audrey's where you can help a debut author.
Yes.
Enter the world of being a published author. I mean, that is an extraordinary moment, and that you get to be a part of that.
It is. We feel a little bit like proud parents when we see it. And that was why when we get event grids and the publishers will say, here are the authors with new books going out on tour. And we saw Audrey's name. We're like, well, we call dibs. We've got she has hours. We have to do her launch party. So it's so exciting to see people that have worked so hard just get to launch their books into the world and to selfishly share the fun with them and get to see how well they do and call them and say, hey, we ran out of books. Can you come back and sign some more? It's so much fun, which we have gotten to do with Audrey already. So.
It was very cool. And I thought she meant I needed to come in and sign like 2 books, and they had a whole box for me, which was very cool.
So Audrey, this book that you just signed, more copies of, and we should say the audience, we're putting links below to buy the Minuscule Mansion of MYRA Malone from Fountain, and I imagine you can get signed copies as well.
You can indeed.
Go ahead and purchase your copy today. So you've talked about this, and I mentioned it in the reviews, that there's magic in this book.
Yes.
And I wondered about the books you read as a child, and how they shaped the writer that you are. Because, we think about, I asked this, I did another interview for our show, and I asked an author this question, and I want to ask you it as well. I did this course with Alexander Chi, and he was talking about what is a novel for. And he talked about this idea that we're shaped as writers by the books we read as children. Like we may say, oh, I'm inspired by John Irving or, Hemingway, but you didn't read that when you were 6. I mean, maybe some people, but, most people don't, right? And so we read other books as children. And I'm wondering what books you read when you were younger that shaped you as a writer now, because you also are a humor writer, and we're going to put the link to all your writing that you do for McSweeney's below. What is it that kind of influenced your voice and your approach to writing?
I've always read really widely. And I think part of that was because my parents, when I was growing up, were English teachers. And we also lived in this very small town right on the edge of the Navajo Reservation in northern Arizona. It's Lake Powell, if you've seen it in the news. We lived right there. And so consequently, it had a pretty small library. There weren't any bookstores. The nearest bookstore was 3 hours away in the Flagstaff Mall. And so everything I read, I pulled from my parents' library. We had this enormous my dad is a builder also and has built substantial portions of every house I've ever lived in. And so he had made these bookshelves that went from floor to ceiling all around our dining room. And we had everything from, a 1978 surplus Encyclopedia Britannica to, every possible fantasy book you could imagine. Tolkien and C.S. Lewis were huge. I I was a deeply nerdy child. And
All my favorite.
right. And I say that with a great deal of affection for the little girl that I was. But I was somebody who I was always reading, and I always read very, very fast. And I had this kind of book that I made in my closet, which I think is something genetic, because my daughter did the same thing without me even prompting her. But I had this little place in my closet that I would read. And I remember when I first read the Lord of the Rings series, I was so enraptured by it and so sad when it ended that I cried. And then I started reading all the associated literature I could find with it. I read the whole thing, the Silmarillion, which it's like reading the Bible. Yes, and I read that. I had my mom take me to a lecture at the local university simply because the person who was speaking, and he was speaking about Chaucer, he held the J.R.R. Tolkien chair at Oxford University. And so I'm like, well, clearly I have to go and fangirl over this person. Maybe he knew him. I just had no chill when it came to imaginary stories. And I read all of them. And I had parents that, for better or for worse, were not the type of parents who would be like, go outside. Like they would, like, if I got to the end of a story and I was like, I can't believe this story is over, I'm so sad, my parents would be like, oh, you should read this next. So I remember when I finished The Lord of the Rings, my mom gave me the Mary Stuart series, which is like the Merlin series, the Crystal Caves and stuff like that. I was reading all the time. And I also, I had an interesting mix of things that were everything from, really big world building fantasy to things like the, Woodhouse, Jeeves, those kinds of humorous stories. I read a lot of Agatha Christie. Hercule Poirot was one of my favorite characters when I was a kid. And all of those things, I think they just kind of built on each other. I've always been a person that is really primed to see connections between things. And so I'd recognize elements from one story and kind of pull it in from the other. And so I was a kid who lived very much in my own head. And which, as I'm talking about this again, a little bit of MYRA. But I think that all kind of conspired to make it so that even as an adult, I love a story, even if it's not. I love magical realism for one thing. And I think one reason that I like I love fantasy too, but I think one reason that I love magical realism so much is that it lets you almost think, because the world looks so much like the one that we're living in, it kind of thins that veil and makes you think that at any moment you might walk into something that's a little off kilter and a little magical. And there are times that you really need that, right? You really need to feel like there's going to be something out there that's a little magic. And so I think that really had a lot to do with who I am as a writer, because that tends to be the kind of story I'm attracted to.
I like the explanation that you read widely, because I think that's so important to, Andy, I'm sure you can speak to this as a bookseller, like the more you read in different genre, the more you understand the basics of narrative and plot and character development. Right. And you also can see, I would imagine, possibility. Yeah. That if you only read one genre, you don't.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I sought out really obscure writing, because one of the other, again, nerdy elements, I did a lot of speech and debate and spoken performance when I was in high school. And again, a benefit of having my parents' kind of literature background is that I could find things that nobody else could find. Someone was going to be reading Jonathan Livingston Seagull. I was going to find something way obscure and way weird. and so I was always looking for stories that could draw people in orally as well as in writing. And also things that had that kind of element of humor, or that little extra hook that could kind of get somebody. I read a lot of poetry. And I was terrible at it, really terrible at it, still terrible at it. But it taught me a lot about literary precision and precision with language in a way that actually probably more than any other genre informs how I write humor. And so I think that all of those things kind of conspired to loop together to make where I am.
Excellent. So there you
yes.
go. So Andy, I'm curious, when when someone comes to the store and they say that they want to read, well, actually, I mean, which genre is Audrey's book?
So it's a tough one because it really does kind of defy it. Honestly, right now, I'm going to cheat with this answer and say it's on a table we have that is all signed copies.
Okay.
So,
That's a genre. Signed.
Signed. I do think officially we have it classified as fiction, but when I'm talking about it, I do say that there's some magical realism. There's kind of a hint of romance to it. It's really doesn't fit in any one specific section. So, which is helpful to have the signed copy table because we can choose.
And I think readers like that, right? I mean, you want something that's a little bit different, right? You don't want to read the same thing all the time. So,
and there's always some people that will say, oh, well, I don't want to read a romance. I just want to read a good fiction story. I'm like, great, I've got a great fiction story for you. They ask for magical realism. I'm like, I've got a great one. So sometimes the reader maybe doesn't know that they might not mind a little bit of romance or magic thrown into what's just a basic fiction book. Yeah. So we can kind of go that route too, and maybe not trick, but open up a new door to someone who maybe didn't realize they would be interested.
Well, that is one of the very many skills, the very, very many skills of a bookseller is, well, taking your money, obviously. I
very good at that.
I have left my local bookstore with many more books than I ever intended. But there's this ability of a bookseller to present a book to a reader who might think, I don't read that. Yeah. And then they fall in love with it. How do you do that? Like, what's the magic? Since we're talking about magic today.
That's right.
Right. The sort of magic of a bookseller to sort of connect a reader with a book. What is that?
One thing that I have found super helpful is asking them not just what they like to read, but what else do you do? Do you watch movies? Do you watch TV shows? What do you like that's on Netflix? What do you like to do when you get outside? And you can find an interest that will kind of sneak its way in. And really the bottom line is just listen to them and let them talk about how they're feeling and maybe what they're in the mood for. On Bookstore Romance Day, which is one of my favorite holidays of the year. It's every August. We had some poor child come in and say, I have just been through a terrible breakup. I did not realize it was Bookstore Romance Day. I want anything but a love story. We've got to. And we found her a book, and she never came back and said, so hopefully she liked it. But sometimes, somebody that wants to read all the twisty mysteries is just burnt out with bad news and needs something light and easy. So it's just really listening to them that day and hearing what they need and kind of figuring out what will make them excited and giddy to go home and immediately crack that spine.
Excellent. And that's a perfect segue into my next question, which is our audience always wants to hear what our author and our bookseller are reading. So after our audience has read The Minuscule Mansion of MYRA Malone, Andy, what's on your top read list? What's popular in the store, or what are you looking forward to reading, or what are you reading now?
This in 2023, so many amazing books are coming out. We compile our top 10 every year. This year it's going to be impossible because it's March and I already have like 12. I will say one really great follow-up after you have read The Minuscule Mansion of MYRA Malone. If you want to keep that feeling in that same world of magic and happiness and just wit and creativity, there is a beautiful book called this is a tongue twister, The Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches. Yes, by Sengu Mandana. It's wonderful. It's like a hug in a book. It's heavier on the magic, but it's darling. And I believe it might also be a Berkeley book. I think y'all might be publishing siblings.
Yes, I think that it is. Yeah, it's on my list too.
It's fantastic. I had the pleasure of doing a virtual interview with Sengu as well, and she is a delight. She's so great.
Cool.
Since it's International Women's Day, I'm going to keep with the women. It is currently out. It just came out in February by another local author because we're so spoiled. The House of Eve by Sidiqua Johnson.
Oh, I've heard great things about that.
Yeah.
Every single one of them is true. It's fantastic.
Okay.
And Deanna Raybourne is a big favorite of the store. We love her. She's a Virginia author too. She's actually coming to see us on Saturday.
I'm going.
Yay! I'm so excited. So she does an amazing series called the Veronica Speedwell Mysteries, and that's what we're talking about Saturday. She has a new standalone called Killers of a Certain Age. Oh, it's 4 almost retired hit women. So you don't read a lot of, cool female protagonists in their 60s, and Deanna has brought us fantastic ones.
Awesome.
And I believe she's also Berkeley, which was not intentional.
Yes,
but
she is.
it worked. If you can't tell, we love the folks at Berkeley. So.
And we're putting links to all of the books that you just mentioned below, so our audience can buy them directly from Fountain.
Thank you.
Those are great. Thank you for those recommendations. Audrey, what about you? You've been writing books and other things. Have you had time to read? And if so, what do you recommend?
I'm sorry, totally just cut you off. I don't read when I'm drafting. I found, unless I read really old, like I'll read old, Eudora Welty and stuff like that. But I just finished my 6th book at the end of last year. And so I actually am finally chipping away at my TBR pile. The 2 that I have just finished most recently are doing great and don't need my help, but I'll say them anyway. I finished Lessons in Chemistry, which I loved. My mother actually she gave it to me for Christmas, and she sat down when I opened it. She sat down, and because she'd been telling me to read it for months. And she finally was like, read the first 3 pages right now in front of me. And if you can put it down after that, I'll stop bothering you. And of course I couldn't. I loved it. And then yesterday I was on a plane all day, and I finally finished, I finally had a chance to read Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow. And oh my God, it was so good. So good. And I think I've been singing its praise. I was telling everybody in my family, like, you have to get this book. And several people were saying to me, well, it seems like it's about gamers. And I'm like, no, it's not about, it is nominally on the surface about gamers. It's about storytelling, and it's about friendship. And it's probably the most tender and heartfelt and genuine picture of lifetime friendship that I have ever read. And I mean, it just hooked me from the very beginning and wouldn't let go. I love both of them so much. And so I just finished those, and now I have a bunch of other stuff. I'm next on my list is Demon Copperhead by Barbara Kingsolver, so I can't wait to get into that. So that's where I am right now. I'm finally getting to go through some things to kind of catch up on what I wanted to read.
It's an embarrassment.
Yes.
Sorry, guys. So, Audrey, you have another book coming out next year, A House Like an Accordion. I love these titles. We should say that if you've picked up a copy of The Minuscule Mansion of MYRA Malone, there is the first chapter of A House Like an Accordion in it. So you can read it and then get mad because it's not out yet. But you can put in your calendar.
I get to read it early.
Oh, I
hope. Actually, Audrey, please, can I have an arc when they're ready?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yes, you will be on the list. Sure.
Oh, you have it ready? Yeah. Okay. Andy's lobbying to get an early copy.
Never hurts to ask.
That's the secret power of the
bookseller perks.
Bookseller is that you're always reading books that haven't come out yet. Can you tell us a little bit? I can see that it takes place in 2016. So tell us about the book.
Sure. So it's about A House Like an Accordion is about a woman who, when she's 39, realizes one morning that she's beginning to physically disappear. And she is a little, concerned, understandably, about that. Because when you're a middle-aged woman, it's not abnormal to feel invisible. She hadn't had the actual physical experience of that happening yet. So she's starting to try to figure out how that could be happening. And the only thing she can figure out is that it might have something to do with her father, who had disappeared about 15 years earlier, and who she thought was dead, but who had a very unusual skill in that he was an amazingly skilled artist. And one reason he was skilled is that he had a kind of a terrible talent that pulled reality into his drawings. He could draw so well because he literally drew from life. And he had always warned her about that. And the only possible way she can think of that she might be disappearing is it's her hand, and it's the one that he always balanced against when he was teaching her how to draw. And so she realizes she has to retrace where he might be if he's in fact alive, and figure out how to stop him. The only way she can figure out how to do that is to relocate all of the homes that they lived in when she was growing up, and to try to kind of retrace where he might have wound up. And so the book kind of follows her on that journey as she has to kind of rip off the Band-Aid of some times in her life that she had not had not been back to in a while. And it's funny, and I know it sounds like it's really sad. It's much like the MINUSCULE mansion. It has a lot of humor in it. She's unexpectedly wealthy. Her and her husband's company has been very successful, and so they live in a mansion in Malibu. And so going back to this kind of hand to mouth existence she had as a child is kind of an adjustment for her. But it's a really fun, it's a family story, and it's a story about being a mother, and it's a story about being a daughter. It was actually inspired by a tweet of all things. A friend of mine had tweeted a question about, if money was no object and you could get anything you wanted to kind of make your life feel more complete, what would it be and why? And I was surprised at how quickly I realized that my answer would be that I would buy every house I grew in growing up, because my parents had built most of them. And when they were complete, that's when it was time to move. And so we have all these little structures all over the Southwest that contain pieces of who my family was at the time. And I don't know how else to describe it. There was a huge emotional resonance to thinking about, the little cubby bed that my dad built. And you might get the sense that I do a lot with buildings and houses. And I think that probably had, as much to do with the structures I lived in as the books that I was around. And so, yeah.
Well, your explanations of your books, of both the MINUSCULE mansion and your new book, what's coming out to me, at least, is how much of you are in these books. I mean, that's present with any author, but we're really seeing these elements from your life that you're weaving into the story and you're building off of. And that's actually the advice that a lot of like that's like Anne Lamott's advice, right? You steal from life into your writing, and you're really making that, you're imbuing your story with your own humanity, and that's exciting to see. I will take exception though, Audrey, because 39 is absolutely not middle-aged.
No.
Very, very young.
Women everywhere.
I agree. Neither is 44.
Yes, absolutely not.
That's right. Agree. And Audrey, you said something about it being sad, but you do such a good job of writing serious topics, and maybe it's because you also write humor, but they're more touching than sad. And you don't feel like it's a great big bummer. It's just you deal with them in a really sensitive way that I think comes across as very sweet and touching and not sad. So I didn't.
Well, thank you. That's what I was trying to accomplish with both of these books, and I hope that I succeeded.
It does sound like a good comp for this new book is The Time Traveler's Wife.
There is kind of an element to that. And I've gotten that comp sometimes, strangely enough, with the MINUSCULE mansion too. Yeah. But yeah, I think that, and another Audrey, as it happens.
That's true.
Right, Audrey
Yeah.
Oh, wow. I love that book. So
yeah, me too. Me too.
Oh, I could really talk to you two forever.
I know. I'm having so much fun. Let's do this again next week.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you so much for being with us today. Audrey, congratulations on the book.
Thank you.
I'm very excited for you. And your second book, one book's a lot, but two, that's like double home runs. I'm sure there's some official baseball. Andy, I have been to Richmond, but I have not been to your store. So clearly I had made a mistake.
We need to see you in person.
I will rectify that someday soon, I hope.
I look forward to it.
Thank you both for making time for us. And again, to our audience, all the links to all the books we talked about today are below. Links to Audrey's website, stores as well, social media, the events at the store. Go check all these things out. And thank you everyone to being with us today. If you liked today's show, and we certainly hope that you did, please subscribe to A Mighty Blaze on Facebook to get notified about all of our events, or hop over to our website. If you're not a Facebook person, it's amightyblaze.com, and you can sign up for our newsletter. It goes out once a week, gives you the rundown of all of the shows. We will be back next Wednesday at 4 p.m. Eastern Time with our 128th episode with the one and only Hank Philippi Ryan, who's we love Hank here on A Mighty Blaze. And she will be joining us. And as our audience may know, we're on an effort to have a bookstore in every U.S. state, as well as Washington, D.C. and Puerto Rico. And so Hank is going to be talking to us about a favorite bookstore she has in Indiana. So please log on then again and join us. That's Wednesday at 4 p.m. Eastern Time next week. Until then, be well. And of course, keep reading. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.